Hi, this is Mrs. Anderson, and we are going to continue our discussion on research skills. We did works cited last class, and now we're going to talk about in-text citation. In-text citation is a way to credit a source from your works cited page that you've summarized or used directly in your paper. Now notice that I said summarized. A lot of times people think that you only need to use in-text citation when you use a direct quote, and that is not the case. So let me talk about the three cases where you must use in-text citation. One, you're already familiar with, and that's when you use a direct quotation. And that's what we're doing currently when we write our essays, that you know that you must credit the author and give a page number for where you're finding your quotes in your analytical essays for this class. A second case when you must use in-text citation is when you paraphrase or summarize any information that was not common knowledge into your own words. And I understand that in many cases you're doing research because you don't know anything about that particular topic in the first place, but it is always wise to credit your source, and even if you're putting it in your own words, to let people know where you learned that research fact. The third case when you're going to need to offer a citation is when you offer a statistic or fact. The reason for this is that in today's day and age, we really need to be prepared to prove that the information that we have is valid, and a citation allows someone to look up your source and fact-check it. In my humble opinion, it's always better to oversight than not cite at all. You don't want to run across an issue where someone could accuse you of plagiarism. So now that we've discussed what information needs to be cited, let's talk about where the citation goes. It is called in-text citation because the citation goes within the text that you are writing. You put the source in parentheses at the end of the sentence before the period. Since that source is going to be going in parentheses at the end of a sentence, it's really important for you to make sure that you do not write a sentence that includes information from multiple sources. It would be too challenging for a reader to identify which part of the sentence is attributed to which source. So when you are writing research, it's important to make sure that you only have one source that you're using per sentence. We know that the citation goes at the end of the sentence in parentheses, but the question is, what am I citing in those parentheses? And the rule of thumb is whatever is listed first for the works cited entry is what's going to go in parentheses. So the first case that we're looking here is a case where we have an author for my works cited entry. Julia Preston is the person responsible for authoring the article that I borrowed the quote from. So at the end of the direct quotation, I have Preston in parentheses. Notice that the period goes after the parentheses. There's no page number included in the citation because her source is an internet source as opposed to a print or a book one. So what I wanted to show you through this example is an instance where two works cited entries have authors with the same last name. Perhaps I'm using sources from the authors Julia Preston and Douglas Preston. So the way I can differentiate and let people know which writing came from which source is to start with the last name, follow with a comma, and then follow with the first initial of the first name. So in the first piece of writing, that comes from Julia Preston, and the second piece of writing comes from Douglas Preston. Notice in the second example from Douglas Preston, there's a 5 after the D. And that's one of the ways that you can tell that this is a book source as opposed to Julia Preston's source, which was an internet site. So now we need to move on to what do I cite in the parentheses if the works cited entry has no author? Well, since the rule is you always use what's listed first in the works cited entry, that means that you're going to use the title of the article in quotes. So you can see for this example, athlete's foot is in quotation marks, and within parentheses, the period follows the piece of borrowed information that comes from the WebMD article that I read. But what I wanted to show you is a very common occurrence and will probably happen a lot, is that when you're doing research, sometimes you have two sources that have the exact same article title, and you have to find a way to differentiate that when you get to your in-text citation. So what you do in that case is you start with the article title in quotes, you follow with a comma, and then include part of the italicized website title. So in this example, I had two sources that were called Athlete's Foot Topic Overview. So when I cited them, the first thing that I did is make sure I include the quotation marks and a shortened version of the article title, just so that it wouldn't be a super long citation, because I also have to include the title of the website, which I also abbreviated. make sure the title of the website is in italics. So what I have here is what a completed paragraph looks like with in-text citation in the accompanying works cited page. I realize this is probably very, very tiny as you're watching this video, so I have given you access to it on Schoology so that you can see it in full view and be able to look at it a little bit more closely. And just like I said when we discussed works cited, if you ever have questions about how to do something using in-text citation, I would advise going to the Purdue Online Writing Lab. It's a great site that can answer a lot of your questions. So now we're going to talk about the practice that we're going to do. These source cards and note cards should look fairly familiar to you. On the left-hand side, we can see the fact, the quote, or the stat that the individual found. And on the right side, we can see the source that they found that information. This is going to become important because you're going to be completing the in-text citation part for this individual's research paragraph. So here is the paragraph that this student wrote. Unfortunately, she has not completed the in-text citations. So using those source cards, use the fact, the stat, or quote that they found on the left-hand side to identify what should be going in the citation. Remember, look at your works cited page to see what's listed first in the entry in order to determine what should go in the parentheses. So the assignment that I just described you can find on Schoology. There are links to the source cards and to the research paragraph where you're going to be completing the in-text citation. And it is going to be most helpful for you to have a copy of the works cited page that you and your partner completed last class. So if you could go ahead and complete the in-text citation for that paragraph, there will be an answer key for you to check your answers.